Hi everybody, Matt Lawton here, and this is a special edition of the Astrological Winds Channel blog, a little quarterly thing I do just for some mundane astrology. Going to take a look at the next quarter, or even really up to the next year of the United States by looking at the Capricorn solstice chart. And I've been using this method for over 20 years to get a good read on what's going on in the United States socially and politically, and what we can kind of expect to see. So that's what this blog's all about. And I'm going to show this chart instead of me here. So this is the Capricorn solstice chart set for Washington D.C. and what you do is you set the solstice chart for the capital of the country that you live in, and that will give you an idea of what that country is like. So other countries, it's not going to line up exactly the same. The planets are going to all be in the same exact degrees, but they're going to line up in the houses differently. The rising signs and the midheaven will all be different. So for this blog, this is really looking at the United States, where most of my followers are. And so the first thing to know, it's a solstice chart, so that means it has to do with the sun. It's a sun. It's a chart that's based on what the sun is doing, and the sun is at 0 degrees Capricorn right here. You can see, and so the sun and the aspects that the sun has this day are very important everywhere in the world. So let's not even talk about Washington D.C. and this is just imprinted into the solstice, and this will have an effect for at least the next 3 months, the next quarter. What I actually really believe myself is this is the main chart that actually has an effect for the next year too. A lot of people use the spring equinox chart as a yearly one, but I've found this one to actually be more accurate on trying to give a full year. But at the very least, it's for the winter quarter. And so, like I said, without even looking at it as Washington, D.C. first, like I said, the sun is very important in this chart. And the aspects that are in this chart are the same aspects everybody's getting in the world on the solstice. So those aspects are going to be imprinted in this chart. And just looking at the sun first, you can see that the sun is in an exact square to Jupiter. Very, very tight. Jupiter just back into Aries. And I talked a lot about that in my weekly blog last week, so you can check that out if you're interested in knowing more about that. But both, in this critical new degree, the first degree, and in this very tight square within 7 minutes square. And that's one aspect that's going on with the sun in this chart and will be imprinted into the next quarter to a year. And it's also this sesquiquadrate here of the sun to Uranus out in Taurus. And the sun is tightly square Ceres, which is actually putting it in what we call a T-square configuration here. The sun square both Jupiter and Ceres. So this T-square and the sesquiquadrate to Uranus is energy that the whole world, we're all going to feel for the next quarter or even year. And what that means. And the Jupiter Ceres, right away, I talked about this in my new moon blog too, that has a lot to do with resources and resource issues. So we're going to probably continue to see that. And I think really what's going on now, a lot of what this shows, Jupiter is all about growth and expansion. So what a lot of this shows is there's a lot of opportunity for growth and expansion going on, but the resources may not be there to actually support the greater vision. One of the biggest problems with the Sun square Jupiter, even without the series in there, is that The vision is grand, but the details may not be able to add up to being able to support that vision. So when you bring Ceres in, then you start to think, well, the problem's going to be like literally not having the resources to do it. Now, the other thing to remember too, though, about this Sun Jupiter square part 2 is it can be just so many things going on at once that you just don't have the resources or time to deal with everything. And that, can really be a good way to, describe a lot about what's going on in the world right now and in the United States. It's interesting, too. The Sun is conjunct the Descendant. See, it's right on the 7th house cusp here. It's slightly into the 6th house. And that shows in the Washington, D.C. for the United States, a lot of what's going on in relation to this stuff has to do with our allies and with our open enemies. So I'm thinking like this war that's been going on now for a year or so between Russia and the Ukraine is really what's driving a lot of the, resource issues that are holding up growth and expansion, and therefore in the United States needing to take like the president and needing to take like an active role in meeting with allies, that is NATO, and deciding what to do in this case, and also even opening up dialogue with the people at war, with who we are disagreeing with. In this case, that in the United States is on the side of Ukraine and supporting Ukraine with NATO. So that means opening up dialogue possibly with Russia and Putin, and that maybe that is the type of thing. But like I said, this is the energy of just a lot of different things going on, a lot of issues going on, and it's just very difficult to get a handle on all of them. Now, one of the things that's interesting too, going back again to just the Sun square Jupiter in this chart, and no matter what country you're in, this is also a challenge to see. Jupiter's a societal planet as it is, so this is a challenge to the values and the beliefs of society going on right now. Like all these issues that are seemingly unable to get a grip on, societies not being able to get a grip on, are actually a challenge to the way what they value and believe in is what's really going on. And you can see it can bring up a lot of religion and state issues being mixed together. Jupiter, rules religion in mundane too. So like when you get a square, there can be these issues of like politics and being influenced, or the state and religion being mixed together and causing some of the issues that go on. Now also, Jupiter also rules the law and the courts, and in the United States, that has definitely been a big issue now, where the Supreme Court seems to have been politicalized. So here you get the square going back to the Sun, who represents the president or the executive in a government, and you can see there's going to be continued tension between the executive branch and the judicial branch in the United States here too. And it's almost like with the series coming in, it's almost like the Supreme Court is over-parenting the nation. And how fitting that is, because it's almost like just several people deciding what values, Jupiter, they are going to push on everybody. So it's a very interesting, telling thing that we're going to be continuing to deal with this. This can also bring up issues with the universities, and I think what this is, again, is this big issue going on between Biden, the executive, and the courts over the excusing of student debt. So that's another big tension spot we're going to see a lot of in the next quarter to a year. And also even wealth, like Jupiter does represent our wealth. So it's showing like we're having issues being able to get our wealth. So this is like, just impregnated. And it's not only, the US when the general issues. This is every country is getting this Sun square Jupiter, Sun square series, no matter where. It's just maybe going to line up in different places. Now, the Sun sesquiquadrate Uranus is really interesting too. In this case, once again, this represents blocked energy, energy that is stuck. And there's really not much that can make it move. And what's interesting, once again, is the Sun is the executive branch, and Uranus is out in the 11th house, which represents the legislative branch. So there is a disconnect, or in the United States, once again, there's going to be a disconnect between the executive branch and the legislative branch, and everything's going to be stuck. And, that's really, once again, a lot of that has to do, the United States really hurts itself when it can't get much done on that level. But there's just part of the problem that can come across too with the Sun square Jupiter is just like, the United States being perceived by enemies and allies as being, this arrogant, self-righteous kind of stance. And we are like that. We're one of the few countries that doesn't sign many treaties in the world. So, it's just the way these other people are seeing us, is a good way to say it. It's our allies out in the 7th house. It's our allies and our enemies. So, it's the way they can see us. But anyway, back to the Sun sesquiquadrate Uranus. This can show there's a lot of frustrating and upsetting events that are going to occur. Once again, a lot of them, just difficult relationships. And in this case, it's the president versus Congress in the United States, feeling that, each is trying to restrict the other, just a lot of disagreement and getting things stuck. So, just also can indicate, almost like events that are abnormal or surprising. So there could be a lot of different events this year that are out of the ordinary that kind of block the ability to, move forward in many directions. And it can definitely affect, like I said, in particular the president. And it can even be stuff that could be like natural disasters or man-made disasters that, just are, somehow are stopping or slowing down the progress of things. So very, very interesting energy impregnated in the chart there. And I'm going to talk about some of this other stuff too. There's also a very interesting, there's a moon opposite Mars in the chart for the whole world too. And in the United States, it's going to connect to the MC. And then also the whole world has got a Mercury and Venus conjunction going on in Capricorn. So some interesting energy there. Now, going back to US, like I said, this is a solstice chart, so the sun is so important. But Cancer is rising in the U.S. chart, so that makes the moon actually the ruler of the chart in the United States. And the moon represents the people, the common people. And so it's in Sagittarius in the 6th house. And it's opposite Mars retrograde in the 12th house. And they're also in another T-square, this one with the midheaven and also Vesta on the midheaven. And so very interesting. Right now, the people are very emotionally involved in the state of the nation, is what this is saying. And there's a lot of people who are very upset. There's a lot of people that there's a lot of anger. There's a lot of anger being expressed. There's a lot of wanting to push into new places. Like, people are ready to wanting to move on to new places, yet there's the institutions of the government, which is the 12th house, where Mars is retrograde, have us stuck. And part of the reason of that is what I've talked about a lot with the Mars and Gemini, is there's two distinctly different political sides in the United States that are unable to come to any kind of agreement whatsoever. So they're, really not able, and so it's hurting the people nonstop. That's the opposition there, and it's obvious to the rest of the world too. It's very interesting. It's up on the midheaven, this square, so it's like showing everybody in the world is aware that there's this political dichotomy going on in the United States, that there's a lot of emotion tied up into, and people really upset with the government institutions. And interesting enough too, the moon in the 6th house too is that's the house of civil servants, like the police and the military and stuff. So there may be a lot of interaction between the police and military and civil servants and people too coming up in the next year. But there's a lot of just decision making that people are trying to make, but it's just getting them into what I would call almost emotional battles that are being played out through civil servants, through the institutions of government. And a lot of it once again is being driven by this Cancer energy on the ascendant, of not getting what we normally need. The U.S. is a Cancer country. It values family. It values kind of that traditional American suburban lifestyle, and that's kind of what's under threat. And that's where people with the moon and Sag are realizing that and thinking, there's got to be a way to do something different. But up here, the Pisces midheaven shows that leadership has not been able to do that so far. And then the square to Vesta goes back to the Mars in Gemini being retrograde, where there's two different sides that are two different encampments. So they're almost two different brotherhoods or sisterhoods on each side of the political coin, trying to be the one who dominates what is going to go on, what their ideals are, what they can push, their values. That's the Pisces energy coming in, and Pisces is ruled, by this Jupiter and Mars. So we go back to that Jupiter again, where everybody's kind of going a little bit overboard and not really trying to push their own values, their own ideas, their own laws, trying to use political institutions to do that. So there's a lot of misunderstandings, a lot of deceptions, a lot of secret stuff that seems to be going on. And so they can be another year where resources and the way things people are dealing with and the different political choices are causing a lot of confusion, a lot of anger, a lot of infighting, a lot of emotional stuff. It's another year where the United States really looks like it's going to be more focused on itself and the issues going on, and an inability to really come together to deal with those issues, despite having lots of good ideas and a population that's, for the most part, willing, to want to take some changes. It seems like, both the executive branch and the judicial branch, and the executive branch versus the legislative branch, are not able to, this year, to come together again and really elicit a lot of those changes that people would like to see. And it's interesting too, Cancer, is on the 2nd house cusp too, which means the moon is also ruling the 2nd house. So it's not only the state of the nation that people are feeling insecure, the 1st house, about resource, and feeling angry and upset at governments and institutions, and it's being reflected back out onto leadership and into the world and our public image. But it's also literally the resources of the nation are in a tight spot right now. Down here, the second house, the moon is ruling that also. So it's a tough thing going on there. Now the sun, is ruling actually the third house here. There's nothing in the third house. The third house has to do with communications and transformation, and transportation and information. So it's ruled by that moon in the sixth, and it's showing that the moon up there. The sun in the sixth. I'm sorry, it's being ruled by the sun in the sixth, and it's showing once again, issues with local transportation, communications, things like that. People not feeling like they're getting it. Sun square Pluto, not having enough resource to take care of things on a local level. So, people not really feeling like they're getting what they need on a local level too. The fourth house is Virgo, and it's got Ceres in there, and the fourth house has to do with the land, and literally the land of the nation, the physical land, but also like the heritage and the sense of nationalism, and in the sense of that. And it's being ruled by Mercury in Capricorn up here with that conjunction in Venus. So it shows that there's like really a serious attitude and conversation going on. Mercury's conjunct to Pluto too, about heritage and how land is used here. In fact, it's interesting because that Mercury does an awful lot of stuff. It's also sextile Neptune in the 10th, and it's also square Eris in the 11th, and it's also trine Uranus in the 11th, and it's also squaring, and then also you got Ceres down there in the 4th. So once again, I think there could be some issues with real estate, we could see real estate stuff continue to drift down because of this stuff. That a lot of people, but Capricorn energy being fed back into there and Virgo energy are both gonna kind of constrict and restrict things, and maybe people are not being realistic enough about that thing, and it's also maybe a lot having to do with just trying to protect our own land, and things like that. So interesting energy there too. And I think when you think about it from a real estate thing, it looks like it's going to be, the real estate thing is probably going to continue to drift down and be restricted for the next quarter, at least maybe for the next year. The fifth house, ruled by Libra and Venus, is it's the house of entertainment, really, and in the nation, Hollywood basically is what that's all about. And then Venus is up there with Mercury in the 7th, and it's in that conjunction with Mercury in the 7th, but it's also trining out to Uranus in the 11th. So a lot of probably a lot of interesting new forms of entertainment for people. But the South Node's down there too, which makes me feel like people may be using entertainment once again mainly as something that to escape from reality, from the real world. It's something that they can get out of and move the real world and kind of get out of some of the issues that they're having by falling back onto certain kinds of things that they enjoy, that they like to do. But interesting, like I said, it's interesting that the ruler Venus is trining Uranus and basically saying, yeah, there's a lot of new forms of type of entertainment that could come in and entice people and fire up their creative energy, that kind of thing. Talked about the sixth house a lot already, both the moon and sun in there. So it's interesting. It is ruled by that Mars retrograde. Scorpio is on the cusp, and I think that's going to be a continuation of like a lot of people seeing the military and the police in a negative light still, and civil servants, just not, people not being really happy with them. The moon's right there, and even maybe having some issues between them and the president too. There's been some issues definitely with police and military with the president, so it could continue to be some disagreements there. I talked about the seventh house a lot too already, in the sense that that's open enemies and allies. And with Venus and Mercury in there, it shows, this is going to be, there's going to be a lot of negotiating going on with allies and enemies this next quarter to this next year. It's going to be a lot of the focus of the president and the executive branch to work on stuff like that, and try to get into it on deeper levels and try to come up with innovative new solutions to what's going on in the world, that are more appealing to the ideals of the nation. So very interesting there. The eighth house is also ruled, it's ruled by Saturn. Pluto is in there, and so once again, the eighth house is international finance and banking, and this shows there's a lot of transformation going on in world markets. I think, in the sense from the United States standpoint, losing our power in international markets and banking, and erosion of our power. So there's a transformation going on there. And with Saturn ruling it in the square to Uranus still, it shows, our institutions are being shaken up in international finance and banking, and we don't have the respect and power that we once had. Ninth house is the courts, and it's Aquarius, so it's ruled by Saturn, and Saturn's in there, and Saturn is square Uranus. There is a lot of people that are upset with the way the courts are, and the legislator and the courts actually may get into some battles this next year also, this next quarter and year also, since Uranus is in the 11th house of the legislator. But this really puts the courts in the limelight again. Saturn's high up there. It represents courts. It's in the house of courts. And people, in Aquarius, they want decisions that benefit everyone, that are socially just, that are equal. And, a lot of people are feeling like that's not what's going on. So that's another continuing issue. 10th house also, I've talked a lot about already. It's Jupiter is the ruler of it, and Jupiter is in there, and it just went into Aries. So this is the president's house. This is the executive house. And it shows, he may go into action, really roll up his sleeves and fight now for what he believes in and his value systems, things like that. Neptune is strong in Pisces up there. Jupiter is at the top of the chart. But Chiron's in that house too. So it shows that once again, he's not going to get all the things he wants. He's going to have to go through a lot of painful experiences, learning experiences, things like that. And so it's an interesting pattern, because it brings back that whole sun square, and it's almost like there's too much going on for the president to really get a good handle on everything, and then things start to become a little confusing, Neptune and stuff, when mixed messages, not being able to get on the same page with others. 11th house is ruled by Mars, and that's our legislator, and that is so fitting, because we got a Mars retrograde in Gemini, one house each ruled by one party. Nothing really getting done too well. What's interesting, though, look at what's in the 11th house. Eris and Uranus and the North Node. And Eris and Uranus are all about change, rapid change, upsetting changes. Like even the senator from Arizona recently going independent. That is a very Eris type of event, so like there's going to be, the Uranus, there's going to be a lot of change that goes on with Congress, and they're going to be really maybe called upon to start really doing their duty the way they're supposed to, but there's like, might be a lot of upsetting things in relation to Congress. The last thing, 12th house, is the secret enemies and institutions, and we've got Mars in there in very tough condition right now in that retrograde opposite the moon. People just really upset with the institutions of the government right now, and also showing we may have secret enemies already within the U.S. and on our soil, and they could cause trouble. So interesting. It's an interesting chart in the sense of like there's this energy of wanting to go ahead with the moon in Sag and the sun squaring Jupiter, but it seems like resources and an inability to come together and with the different parties and to come together with the different branches of government are going to continue to frustrate a lot of the change that people seem to like really be really wanting, and just like feeling like there's a lot of issues going on at the same time too, so it's very difficult to get deeply into any before another one distracts us. And that definitely sounds a lot like the world today. All right, so an interesting quarter at least on that level, and like I said, this can really imprint into the next year. I think the president's going to have a lot having to do with his allies and the over that war, and the legislator is going to have a really hard time doing anything together again, and the courts are going to be really under the spotlight again, and the people really seem ready to move on beyond a lot of these things, but they're it's like these institutions are still kind of like dragging behind them, but possibly Congress may be one that starts to help break. But resource and economy, real estate, those things are going to continue, it seems like, to feel a pinch for at least the next quarter. All right, this is Matt Lawton. This is the Astrological Winds channel. It's a free blog that's available on the YouTube every week. And just, if you have a YouTube account, become a follower, turn on your notifications, and you will know whenever I post a blog. It's also available on all kinds of podcasts. It's distributed through Buzzsprout. All you have to do is look it up on your favorite podcasts, like Apple iPodcast or Spotify or whatever, and that way you can just listen to it. You don't really need to see the screen necessarily. I do post a link also on Instagram. Look up Astrological Winds channel, become a follower, and Facebook, my private account, and that's Matthew Lawton. So you need to be a friend. Ask me for a friend request first. Matthew with 2 T's, Lawton, Lauten. I am a professional astrologer. I'm available for all kinds of readings. My email is matthuey823@gmail.com. It's a free service. Please pass it on to somebody else. And I know the mundane part is, not as followed. And for people who are interested in it, I hope that this piqued your interest a little bit, and see where we're going to head from here. And if you liked it, please pass it on to someone else. All right, I will see you all on the regular blog for the last week of December's weather report coming up in a couple days. Merry Christmas to y'all. Happy solstice to you all, and Happy New Year's to you all.